I tell you, the Lady Ethelfled is to be betrothed tomorrow." Godwin insisted as Hayard looked through the kitchens, where the warriors stood, eating the offcuts of sheep meat and bread. Osric looked past the kitchen's door and out into the courtyard, where the royal family had stood not an hour before. "Tell him, Elfrith," Godwin finished, as Hayard continued to grin, stupidly. "You can lust after her, all warriors lust after pretty women, but yes, the Mersons will be arriving shortly and their Shittiver Lord Ethelred is going to be betrothed to her, then we'll wed her, and she will leave to the Merson lands. Those not overrun by the Danes, in any case." Elfgar shifted, and drained more ale. "Miral will want to return to Mercia, if he can. Then I want to go, too," Hayard declared. "And see the fragrant lady of the Mersons Everdale." "You are a bard, Hayard," Godwin accused. "Are you sure you are not a Briton? What did happen to Miral?" Osric drifted closer and asked the question of Elfgar, who had himself come from the Merson Guard. Unpaid Virgil ... He had a choice: loss of lands, or exile. Lord Odo intervened and is now the landlord, and Miral works in his service. Osric said no more, thinking how the loss of land or the indentured service to a lord changed a man. "And you, Osric?" Drawing the attention of a king. Elfrith tried to imitate her accent. "My saint, my lord, my king." "Who was your king?" Elfgar asked. "Erland," Osric said. "The High King of Erland." "And you serve him no longer?" Osric looked away, feigning shame. "Like Miral, I fell into disfavor, and as such, I have been passed from lord to lord, until I nearly fell into the hands of the Danes. I seek my kin. Here," she added, hating herself for the attention she had drawn to herself. "Because now, anyone Irish might be seen as her kin, Lord Odo may make inquiries into her time before. And now she had angered Miral by fighting so well, he may make her life very difficult." Then, Osric relaxed. "It is the way, is it not? That warriors are merely better-class slaves?" "Lord Utard may agree with you, Elfgar," the older novice nodded. Osric felt her heart hammer in her chest. As coolly as she could, they looked over to him. "Who?" "A pagan. The pagan who was married to the Lady Mildrith." "A pagan lord? Married to Mildrith?" Elfrith had mentioned a pagan husband, and a pagan queen from Cornwall. That had been her brother? "He is in the service of Alfred, has lands, supposedly, up in the north, which he is desperate to reclaim. Was on a mission for the king, when he fell into dispute with a Danish king." "A Danish king?" Hayard asked, looking over to the older warrior. "No, I mean a king, in the north of Britain, who has been made so, and was Danish. Alfred approved it. And he sent him tribute, to keep him in his place." "Guthard," Osric whispered, thoughts invading her mind. "What?" Elfgar looked across to her. "Nothing," Osric said. "This Utard, why has he displeased the king, so?" "Not displeased him," Elfgar replied, as the doors of the kitchens were opened from the courtyard so a dead pig could be brought through for cooking. He lowered his voice. "Yet, he will not renounce his paganism, ended up as a slave to Danes, so I hear, then they liked him and brought him up as their own." He looked around at the warriors who were listening, food and ale suspended as they listened. "He can speak like one of them and worships their gods, even though he was baptized twice," Osric added, silently. "So," he Elfgar added, relishing the story, "ends up down here, fights for the king, marries the Lady Mildrith, leaves her, and travels north on Alfred's behalf to ensure fellowship. So Alfred can show who's Bretwalda." Elfrith scoffed. "He has ambition for there to be only one king in the whole of the British Isles." "Ireland too?" Osric asked. "Why not?" Elfgar scoffed. "But the bastard Danes, and the Norse are keeping him from conquering the traditional kingdoms. Danelaw has helped, Mercia are none too happy, I can tell you. Miral is resentful." "Why?" asked Godwin, biting into his bread. "Because his lands are now in Daneland, of course. East Anglia. "Oh, the king is called Ethelstan, Guthard, I am sure you have heard of him?" Indeed, thought Osrith. The Battle of Ethand done. Oblivion to all of the Anglish and Saxon kingdoms if Alfred had lost. And even if they weren't, Miral owes his living to the Lord Odda, for the debt. And you seem to have upset him, Osrith. Elfgar added, by fighting like a bloody berserker. Osrith said nothing, but nodded, modestly. So, why would this pagan lord feel he is enslaved? Pressed Godwin. Because he was one, of course. This northern, Danish king sold him into slavery for, well, I dunno. Something about a woman. His sister, I think. Elfgar turned to Hayard. So, keep your eyes, and your mind off the Lady Ethelfled, will you, if you want to just be a mere warrior servant. And God knows we need as many men as we can for the next battle, whenever. But why? A voice penetrated the kitchens, breaking Elfgar's conversation, as two women followed the first as she went with speed about the courtyard. You made the arrangements, did you not? The Lady Elswith, Elfgar nodded, sheepishly as he grinned into his tankard. Now there's a mercen noblewoman for you. And I thought you said to keep our minds and eyes off? Elfrith jibed as the assembled warriors cheered in approval of the warriors' pursuits of the noble female variety. This is why I am in the service of the Lord Odda, Elfgar conceded. Why do you think I am a mere novice, at the age of 26? Men 10 years younger than me have been generals. No, he added, I was a slave at Aylesbury, Mercia's capital. Unlike Miral, I know land to lose when I fell into disfavor. He added, so but I was passed from Sheolf's household. Her uncle. Elfgar looked abashed. I spoke to her more often than the Lord thought proper, shall we say? Odda saw my potential as a warrior, rather than cleaning piss pots. He turned to Osrith. So yes, Osrith, I can see your point about slavery. But, at least we get to fight, do we not? Be glorious. And that was her brother, then, Osrith thought. She did know some of the pieces, but for them to be put together before her eyes was a shock. And this Utad, what is he like? She asked, thinking about Mildred and her sadness for her son, their son, Osrith reasoned, her nephew, then. A bastard. Elfrith said. But can fight like no one I've ever seen. Odda trusted him when no one else would, and he fired Guthrum's whole fleet, killed Yuba with one move, right in the face, he added. Yuba? Kinavivar, Elfrith added. They all came over, from Denmark, for land. Not to rule, which is why Alfred is on top. Men need governing, and the Danes have no interest in that. He leaned closer to the men. I saw Utad the pagan clear a shield wall at Ethand done, he added. He is good. That's why the king tolerates him. And he has land here? Osrith asked. Why the interest? Elfgar asked, suddenly. Just. She screwed up her face. A pagan, she declared, with put-on distaste. How does the king tolerate that? He gives him short enough leash, and keeps him beholden, Elfgar finished. So, while he is a lord in bondage to Alfred, who uses his sword in exchange for tolerating his paganism. He leaned closer to Osrith. If not with such cunning and overlooking of even his own rules, how else will Alfred become Bretwalda? 88,888,888. A boy ran past Osrith as she was put on guard outside the household rooms that afternoon. Usually, the guards were outside the palace, and usually on the ramparts, which Osrith liked, for the views made the duty worthwhile. But, with the increased activity for the betrothal celebrations, the guards had been withdrawn to the inner perimeter of the main palace, the throne room, the kitchens, stables, scriptorium, chapel, to ensure the safety of the guests when they arrived. Utad, Osrith thought, and thought over all that Elfgar had told them. So he was here, then, he was there, in Winchester, and held in esteem by the king. But the news, while softening the ache of worry in her stomach in some ways, had begun concerns of a different kind. Utad had come, that day, when she had seen him from the high tower at Bibbenberg, with the head of one of Elfric's men, not to reclaim the fortress, though maybe he had, but as the adopted son of a Danish warrior. The picture she had in her mind of her brother, she was slowly being taken apart and rebuilt. If the king valued him. She looked out to the courtyard, hand on buoy as a man approached. It was Elfrith. "Miral says you are relieved for the night," Elfrith said, as Elfgar strode behind him. "Elfgar," he added, as the mercenary man stood beside Osrith, "do try to keep your hands off the Lady Elswith, will you?" "Bloody never will tell you lot anything again," Elfgar replied, grudgingly, taking Osrith's place at the end of the household corridor. "Come on," Elfrith called, beckoning Osrith out. She turned towards the stables, but Elfrith took her shoulder. "I need a drink," he said, "and I think you do too, nearly killing Steeper today. Do you know how many people have nearly killed Steeper?" "A lot, I imagine," Osrith replied, relaxing. "A week ale, then, for the next day was bound to be busy, with the mercenaries arriving and the ceremony going ahead." "So?" Elfrith asked, as they sat near the door, away from the prostitutes. "Tell me." "What?" Osrith asked, as a door banging upstairs indicated another customer. "Your story?" "I'm from Alba," Osrith said, non-committally. "You can't understand me very well because you come from the lands of comfort and good food, and I come from a Dane and Norse-ravished land." She sipped at the drink, thinking how much weaker it was compared to the ones Elfgar used to give her. She would be up there now, Osrith supposed, reaping the rewards of more wealth. "You speak Saxon. I speak English, Gaelish, Cymric, Norse. And why did you leave? A woman?" "The king," Osrith said. "A difficult matter." "With a woman?" Elfrith pressed. "I've never seen you with a woman." Osrith lowered her tankard, as Elfgar trod slowly down the stairs at the side of the bar, making sure her uncle could see her taking the money from the relieved man. "Never seen you, never heard you flirt with one, never seen you talk to one." "Why would I?" Osrith said, putting down her tankard. Another group of warriors were entering the inn now, shifting disparate people so they could sit together. "A man then?" Elfrith lowered his voice. "Like Heod and Godwin?" "A man," Osrith nodded, looking away. "And not all men-loving men treat one another as Heod and Godwin do. Sometimes, they are betrayed." "Were you betrayed?" asked Elfrith. But Osrith shook her head. "I left that behind me. I no more want a man, or a woman for that matter, than do I want a rain cloud." Osrith put her tankard back onto the table, then leaned back and folded her arms. "Heod and Godwin are almost inseparable. It's touching, in a sweet way." "You're in for a treat then, when the Lord of Mercia arrives," then Elfrith added, passing his tankard back to the bar. "Place will be thronging. Loves women, loves warriors even more. Everyone will be over him, and I mean everyone." "Lord Sheolf." Behind Elfrith the inn door opened. Through the darkness, Osrit. "No, not him. He's so mad he let Alfred mint coins in his name, and the cunning old King Wessex had coins made showing them both. So much for Merson independence." Elfrith stopped, and looked where Osrith was looking. "You're interested in Lord Utrid?" Elfrith nodded his head in the direction of the group. Osrith started. "Utrid? He's over there. Why the interest?" "The Lady Mildrith, I suppose. I felt so sorry for her. And obviously, he has battle reputation," Osrith added, trying to sound nonchalant. She was glad it was dark, for she felt her face flush in the dimness of the inn. "Good looking, isn't he?" Elfrith continued. Osrith glared at her comrade. "Look, be careful." "What?" Osrith demanded. "I desire nobody." Elfrith laughed. "The closed heart," he mused. "No, not the Lord Utrid, though I would stop staring if I were you if you do not want him to come over. Look, you brought yourself to the attention of the King of Wessex." Osrith glared at him. "In a good way," he conceded, "and he knows you are of Erland. That is unusual in Wessex, and you are fair-headed, which again, unusual." "Look, Elfrith." Osrith slammed down her tankard and pulled him nearer the corner of the inn. "I was married, once, all right. I was in favor to my king, and the Norse attacked. My king's supposed ally. Betrayed him? Elfrith finished. Osrith nodded. It happens. Of course it happens. And I was people like me those are the people who pay. So I got out to find my family. She glared over at the raucous drinking from the half-dozen warriors, amongst whom was, by Elfrith's account, her brother. You think they are here? Osrith stared at Utad, who was laughing with his men, looked at their faces, at their camaraderie. Yes, I am certain they are. 88,888,888. Mercia arrived the next day, and if Osrith thought the activity within the palace had been frenetic before, it was nothing to the upheavals that the Queen, that is the Lady of Wessex, Elswith, had implemented. Beds had to be found for her kin, only the best, and the church had to be prepared. Osrith was on guard duty on the ramparts, which she liked, for nothing much happened, and she could think. He had been there, her brother, within spitting distance the night before. Had she not dreamed of it? And yet, all she knew of him. Osrith knew she could not just turn up in front of him and tell him she was his sister, who knew what he would do. No, the best thing to do, at the moment, was to watch and wait. It was the middle of the morning when, having been relieved by Elfgar, she had made her way to the kitchens, and the sobs of a child could be heard in the family quarters of the palace. Stepping past Hayard, who had been placed on guard by Miral, she saw a boy standing in the passageway, crying. When he saw Osrith he turned away, but did not move, and he was taking great pains to stop. Is there something I can help you with? Osrith asked, gently. Anyone you wish me to kill? She added, hoping that he might laugh at her silly offer. No, he conceded, but wouldn't turn round. Osrith wondered who he was. Perhaps he was one of the mercenaries and was lost, or tired, or missing. Yet, when he turned to her, he looked at Osrith, staring at her, with a kind of daring hopefulness in his eyes. He was about 10 or 11, and Osrith thought he reminded her of someone. You, he began, then stopped, as a girl sauntered past him, looking at the boy mockingly, ignoring Osrith completely. Stopped snivelling, yet? She provoked, pushing his shoulder. The boy said nothing, but that he would not look away seemed to enrage her. Osrith looked at her and realized, with some sort of fascinated horror, the girl, young woman, was the very lady who had questioned Osrith about her fight with Steeper the day before, and who this very day was all in aid of. Ethelfled. He is here, Edward. Ethelfled stormed. Here, with his warriors. He is a hero. But you can't marry him. The boy insisted. The boy, who now Osrith realized, was the king's firstborn, and the Etheling of Alfted's line. Besides, he is married already, and you, he added, with what seemed to Osrith, an equal amount of provocation as his sister had given to him, you are going to marry Ethelred of Mercia. Osrith made to step forward as Ethelfled got angry. She made a noise through her teeth and raised her hand to him. But then she stepped back, folding her arms. Where is your army now, Edward? She asked, notes of triumph in her lovely voice. She pushed him to the open door of one of the rooms. Osrith followed and saw the princess point to the large fireplace, which was blackened from the previous night's burning. Shock crossed the boy's face, and he continued to stare at the hearth as his sister slipped past Osrith and out into the passageway. Osrith too was horrified. His elder sister had burned his toys. It doesn't matter, Edward said, when he realized she was still standing beside him, though Osrith could see he was very much upset by it. Ethelfled is to be betrothed and she does not want to be. His big blue eyes turned to Osrith. She teases me sometimes and I can't help crying because she's so mean. Osrith was taken aback for a moment at the boy's honesty, and she dipped to his height. But you will have a real army one day, Osrith said, smiling kindly. Just make sure your sister doesn't burn them in the hearth, eh? Edward looked at her, and frowned a little as he stared at Osrith, and a feeling crept over her that she might like to back away. Such was the boy's intensity of gaze. You talk very strangely, he said at length, and seemed to brighten. I will not let Ethelfled burn my armies. My armies will rule over the whole of the 7 kingdoms and hammer the Danes into the earth. And with that, The Etheling of Wessex hurried past her, and down the passageway towards the hall. 88,888,888. Osrith watched nobles and guards come and go that day. Back on the ramparts, which she considered Miral thought to be a punishment, but to her was far from. She watched noble after noble pass through the palace gates like she watched for discrepancies in their manner, which could indicate danger, an invasion, an attack. And finally, after watching, came the Lord Dutard. Osrith did not spot him immediately, but his black horse led the procession of two others, his warriors in close ranks around him. Who Osrith saw immediately was the woman with him. Beauty shone from her face, not because her features were necessarily beautiful, but because it was clear she loved the warrior who held her closely behind, and she him. Osrith watched them pass by, watching a space just above their heads, which was in line with the wooden buildings towards the east, an easy place for potential enemies, and merely glancing down to them every so often. So, he was a pagan, yet a welcomed warrior, and he inspired loyalty from the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men who were with him. How should she, Osrith, approach her brother, then? On what basis? You may go down to the celebrations. A voice behind Osrith broke her thoughts, and Elfda grinned. The gates are shut and the feast is to begin, he added. We are all welcome, and Godwyn and Hayard are replacing you. 88,888,888. And food she got, as the tables were cleared away from the hall. The boards stretched out in a U-shape where, at the top, sat the king, the Lady Elswith, Ethelfled and young Edward. To his right hand were the mercenaries, Ceolf to Alfred's side, followed by nobles, and servants behind. At the end of the table sat a tall, well-built man, clearly a man, not an older boy like Ethelfled was an older girl, who was chipping into the conversation with the Lord of Mercia and the king. Osrith glanced back to Edward and had to suppress a laugh as she noticed the boy pick his nose then wipe it on Ethelfled's bread. Down one side sat the Wessex nobles, closest of whom was her Lord Odda, then the nobles from Wiltshire, and Somersetshire, bordering the lands of Mercia. Kentishire nobles sat on the opposite side alongside Dutard, who was indeed enjoying the feast. A frown, however, was on the face of one of the Wessex nobles, who was slunk into one corner, a tankard to his lips. He resembled Alfred, and also Edward, but could not place him in the list of nobles to whom she had been introduced. Still staring at the Lord Dutard? Elfrith asked, leaning past Osrith with a plate of bread and meat. Here, he added. We are to celebrate the union of Wessex and Mercia. I bet Miral and Elfga are celebrating, she said, sarcastically. So is he, Elfrith added, cheerfully. No, really. He thinks he is gaining Wessex, yet he is losing Mercia. The Lord Ethliad, her betrothed. Oh, he doesn't want to, Elfrith added. He still believes Mercia is independent, but of course it is not, hacked to pieces by Alfred, a kingdom that is not his own, half given to the Danes. How can he have done that if he did not rule Mercia? So, Dutard the Danes layer. Osrith felt herself blush. I dare say he is not into buggery, Elfrith added, biting into a chicken leg. Or boys. I wasn't, Osrith protested, though a voice in her head was telling her how useful this may be. I was wondering, that's all. Wondering, Elfrith managed. You, a married man, too, leaving your wife in Alba. Dead. Osrith snapped back forcefully, heart beating in indignation. Burnt to death in a church trying to rescue innocent people, set fire to by my king's supposed ally. Elfrith stared at her for a few seconds. I'm sorry, he managed. Me and my big mouth. Osrith looked away. But, why is he of interest to you? Osrith swallowed. My king, Flansinner, he hosted exiled princes of Alba. As King Alfred dreams of uniting the Saxon and Anglo kingdoms, the kings of Alba have a long-held dream of taking the land in Northumbria, Bernicia, as their own. She leaned closer to Elfrith conspiratorially. But the problem is, Bibbenberg. She looked across to Dutard. It is his land, is it not? His uncle rules there, Elfrith confirmed. Yet the Lord Dutard desires it. I was to have gone, to fight with the princes. Osrith lied, with that aim. We were told Uthed was a savage Dane, and a pagan. He is a pagan, to be sure, Elfrith agreed. Osrith looked across to her brother again. Yet, he does not look like a man in a hurry to return to his homeland, she added, wistfully. Was he comfortable here? Had he given up on that dream? Osrith served the Lord Odd for the rest of that evening and, at length, helped Miral, Elfrith and Elf to get their inebriated lord into his bed. You go, Miral said to Elfrith and Osrith. I will stay as will Elfgar. Elfgar, who had promised himself to go out with Elfrith that night to the Two Cranes, and had, Elfrith later told Osrith, an eye on Elfberg, looked crestfallen. Come with me, Osrith, Elfrith asked. Milk for me then, she nodded, as the feasting had changed to drinking and singing, not as raucous as the evenings with the Gales, Osrith thought, as they passed the feasting hall. It was little wonder, for the king, Alfred, had stomach problems which meant he could only bear to eat plain food, and so he and Elswith were sitting together, drinking milk with a little barley, watching the guests enjoy themselves. Who is that? Osrith asked, as they passed by. Ethelwold, Elfrith said, grimly, holding on to his sword. Ethelwold the untrustworthy? Why Alfred keeps him at the palace I will never know. Why? Son of his elder brother. Desperate to be king himself. Osrith glanced back at the man, who was slowly surveying the room, while drinking from a flagon of, presumably, ale. His eyes met with the serving maids, who instantly moved out of his way, or turned their heads, and when he moved over to speak to a mercen noble, the whole discourse lasted barely more than 2 minutes. Not trusted, Osrith concluded. But then she turned to Elfrith. But, was it not decided by the Witan? She asked, thinking about the Gaelish succession. The best of a group of potential successors was chosen. Well, yes, Elfrith replied. But, you know, Alfred's father, Ethelwulf. Did you know he took Alfred to Rome? Really? The youngest of 6 siblings, and the king chose his youngest son to make the pilgrimage. Had high hopes for his son, Osrith commented. Or, was the most expendable, Elfrith added. Well, he continued, pulling Osrith a little closer. On the way back, they stopped at the court of King Charlemagne, well, not Charlemagne himself, but the Carolinians. Elfrith's voice took on a conspiratorial tone, and Osrith thought to herself that the Devonshire warrior really was a gossip. He caught the eye of a noble lady, Judith, and married her in Reims. So, Alfred got a stepmother, and Ethelwulf got a lesson in succession from Charles the Bald, which was, only the firstborn son would do. So that's what King Ethelwulf did, intend to appoint Ethelbald. Only, Elfrith smirked. His eldest son had taken matters into his own hands and atmoted to usurp his father. That's awful. Osrith exclaimed. Or necessary, the king left the country for a whole year, with Danish incursions still going on. My guess is that the Witan had appointed Ethelbald temporarily so as to make decisions which only the king could. He nodded to Ethelwold. So now, with that precedent, he thinks he should have gained his father's throne, and has made it his life's ambition to let everyone know. And do something about it? He's cunning, Osrith added. Nah, too lazy for that, which is why Wessex would be Danefeed if Ethelwold was king. All of the lords know it. And Alfred keeps him close, so he can keep 2 eyes on him and Dale available. At a distance, might plot far more effectively. Come on, Osrith. Elfrith insisted, knocking her out of her thoughts. There will be no ale left, and no whores. You want a whore? Osrith asked. She knew men did go to them, but was shocked that she was so close to the action, as it were. Don't you? No. Elfrith looked at her, slyly. Not that tall, red-haired beauty? Osrith drew to a halt just outside the gates. No, Elfrith. Osrith said. I do not want a whore, I do not want a wife or a husband. I want only to be a warrior. She looked away, because I have been given a second chance, and I want to serve. Anyway, she added, As they trod the dirt path to the south of Winchester, it was the door of the church, and given all I've done in my life, I doubt God would appreciate my turning up at a monastery. Given what I've done in monasteries, Osrith added to herself. Suit yourself, Elfrith said, but don't mind if I do.